last week, if you were here, we kind of started a two-part that I'll finish today about why relationships fall apart. Now, today we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about unresolved offenses, unresolved conflict, and the failure to make time for people that we care about or in relationship with. And I think you're going to benefit from this. It's called Relationship Bombs, Part 2. And as we talk about this, I want you to think about those bombs from airplanes that we can be intentionally or unintentionally dropping on people we care about. Let's look at the third bomb. Unresolved offenses have an inherent power to destroy relationships. Now, an offense simply means to be hurt at, or angry at someone for what they did. How many can say, I've been there before, preacher? How many can say, I'm there most every day? There's always something that happens to hurt us, to make us angry. Well, Proverbs 18:19 says, an offended friend is harder to win back than a fortified city. Arguments separate friends like a gate locked with doors. And I want to suggest this to you. When we live with an offense, it becomes what the Bible calls a root of bitterness. I love to garden, and I've been transplanting some trees around. I had some tree work done, and I found this, I can't think of the name of the tree, but anyway, it was about this tall, and it was in my asparagus bed, but I recognized the leaves, so I got my shovel and I dug down, and it didn't come up, and I kept digging, and before I knew it, I had dug up a root that was about that long, that was about the size of a carrot. And that's what an offense does. It grows. It's like a tumor that's growing inside your body, and it distorts things. Well, when that happens, let me show you a little picture here. When you let an offense grow in your heart, what you've done, John Bevere calls it the bait of Satan. And if you can imagine, you're that fish, Satan is the fisherman, and he's thrown something at you to make you angry, to hurt you. And what he wants you to do is bite it. Well, how many know we don't have to bite it? But there's a feeling that makes us want to. What's a solution to offenses? Jesus gave us a big one. Matthew 18:15. If another believer sins against you, now I would even suggest this would apply if a person, if your aunt, your uncle, or your work partner, if they sin against you, what are you supposed to do? Go on Facebook. Go privately and point out the offense. And if the other person listens and confesses, you've won that person back. But here's what we need to do no matter what happens. We need to forgive them. See, we equate forgiveness with who is right and who is wrong. But forgiveness cleanses our heart. Forgiveness stops feeding that root of bitterness. Forgiveness turns it over to God. And it opens the door for reconciliation. Now, let me give you a third thing to do that's so important. Keep communicating. Remember what Proverbs says? Proverbs says that offended person is like a fortified city behind bars. Well, how many know if you keep slipping notes under the door, come on now, if you keep knocking on the door and waving, if you keep doing things to act and show Christian love and that you care, how many know the Holy Spirit can soften their heart and this may well can happen? How many know God is a God of reconciliation? Give the Lord a good hand. Let's talk about the fourth bomb, and it's called unresolved conflict. Now, it's similar to offenses, but unresolved conflict. We all know what conflict is. You know, it's a disagreement that we have with someone that can escalate into even violence. 1 Samuel 18, verse 6. The victorious Israelite army, they had been out fighting the Philistines, was returning home after David had killed the Philistine Goliath. Now, everyone remembers the story. This little kid goes out and he picks up a rock, and this, giant comes to kill him, and he whacks him in the head with a rock, and, God wins. Well, all of a sudden, all Israel turns to the future king. Well, listen to what got Saul angry. David killed the Philistine, and the women came out to meet King Saul as they were coming back from battle, and they were singing, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his... Now, come on now. It was just one big dude. But what they did is they made a comparison between Saul and David, and it made Saul, well, the next verse says it made him angry, and you can understand that. From that time on, and I want you to listen to the progression of how conflict works. From that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Verse 10, he began to rave in his house like a madman. Now, mind you, David would come to his house. He was the boy that played the instrument. He would rave like a madman. Well, what was making him mad? These vain imaginations in his head. People were feeding him lies. People were telling him David was going to, dethrone him, or whatever the case was going to be, that David was just better than him and wish he'd get out of the way. Or the devil was just whispering in his ear. Anybody ever heard that voice? Well, he just becomes a madman. Listen to how it escalates. He had a spear in his hand one day, and he threw it at David. But David escaped. Now, jealousy, anger, and violence. Fair to say that's the recipe for conflict? I'm talking a major one now. I'm talking about a knockdown, drag out, call the police kind of conflict that we're having here. First, let me give you some wrong ways to deal with the conflict, and then let's go and find what David did and how you see there's a positive way. Again, one wrong way, as we've mentioned, is to withdraw and just give them the silent treatment. Anybody ever experienced the silent treatment for someone? Yeah, we all know what it's like. Well, guess what? They're offended at us, and they won't say anything, so you need to. They don't want to communicate. They don't want to deal with the issues. It's just let it go. And that root, though, of conflict is just growing deeper inside. It's like that tree root. It's just getting longer and longer and more established, and pretty soon you can't even dig the thing up. Are you with me today? It grows that big. So don't withdraw, and don't lash out in anger and violence. Those are the two extremes. We either pull away or we pull into them, if you know what I'm talking about. Or you pull a knife or a gun or whatever the case is. Now, let's let David show us a positive way for conflict that changed the scenario, at least for a season. Now, here's the first thing David did is he protected himself. Say, what do you mean, preacher? He ran away because his life was threatened. Now, let me say this. If you are in a relationship and there's a conflict and your life is threatened, get out of there. You say, but isn't a wife supposed to, respect and honor and submit and all those kind of things? Yeah, but you're not supposed to, get beat up. So, the second thing, number 2, is he didn't seek revenge or get even. Now, how many would be honest enough to say, I've got a little of that in me. You mess with me, I'm going to get back at you. And somehow David sneaks up on him and cuts off the corner of his robe. And then he says this, verse 11, Saul, understand and know I am not planning any evil against you. I did nothing wrong to you, but you're hunting me to kill me. I'm telling you, he had a direct, honest conversation with Saul. And a direct, heartfelt, honest conversation will solve most conflicts. And let me give you a last one, number 4. David did right even when he was wronged, and it opened a door for the Holy Spirit to convict Saul. Saul's standing here, his army's there, David is at the mouth of the cave, and Saul says this, is that your voice, my son? Is that your voice, my son David? Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, you're more righteous than I am. You have repaid me good, whereas I've repaid you evil. And the best way I can tell you, if you want to diffuse that bomb of conflict, is to do right instead of doing wrong, because it opens a door for God to intervene. Come on, give the Lord a good hand. Failure to make time for people we love can destroy relationships. There were crowds of people around Jesus most of the time, but here in verse 54, he leaves Jerusalem, he goes to the village of Ephraim, and he stayed there with his disciples. So what's the point here? Jesus spent time with people that he cared about. He preached to the multitudes, but I think there are like 3 billion broadly professing Christians in the world today. That all started because 11 men were followers of Jesus and had spent time with them. It's not Jesus' sermons that were recorded that they changed the world. It was what he put into these disciples when he spent time with them. But here's what we talked about, these bombs, and I want you to take just a moment with the Holy Spirit. Last week, broken promises, these are bombs. Broken trust. Today, unresolved offenses, unresolved conflict. And lastly, failure to make time for people will destroy relationships.